I love the new Rainbow Road. It is without a doubt my favorite Rainbow Road theme and how complex and varied yet cohesive it is. Let's take a look at how they wrote such a banger theme using adaptive music, cool orchestration, and just solid motivic writing. I know I just put out a Mario Kart World video, but people are still asking me to analyze a bunch of other tunes from the soundtrack. I don't really like to do direct sequel videos though, and I won't just make another Mario Kart World video for nothing.
Okay, I guess I can do one more for nothing. Ew, ew, ew.
Mario Kart World's Rainbow Road is technically divided into 4 segments, each one having its own variation of the theme. But before you even get to Rainbow Road proper, in classic Mario Kart World fashion, the race actually starts from Peach Stadium, with this big straightaway that leads to a ramp that shoots you up into space. And even though it's not generally considered to be a part of the actual Rainbow Road theme, we need to talk about this massively underrated track and how it serves to lead into Rainbow Road. Let's take a listen. I'm gonna be so real with you guys, this track actually kind of sucks. There's absolutely nothing to latch onto, the chords are all hybridized and ambiguous. Although they all generally function in D major, we never hit that strong D major tonic chord that grounds us, instead moving around these weaker hybrids. The melody, or lack thereof, is similarly weak. Pretty much no melodic material is established and nothing is developed. The entire first section is all just short, unmemorable, incohesive passages that lead into similar ones. But that's surprisingly a good thing. Despite not initially seeming like it, this track is the perfect prelude to the actual Rainbow Road. Obviously, the instrumentation is very similar to what we're going to hear in a second, but it's otherwise so intentionally unsatisfying. As we previously mentioned, we never hit that one chord, despite that tension from the other hybrid chords gnawing away at us. The second section repeats these same 2 chords, which hang and feel so unresolved, while the synth just has this meandering solo. You're not really registering it during the race, but you kind of just want this segment to end and move to something more melodically and harmonically coherent. And this segment features a clever and subtle usage of adaptive music. This page loops indefinitely, only moving forward to segment 1 of Rainbow Road proper after you take the ramp into the sky and see this breathtaking view of the eponymous track. Let's take a look. I mean, just a masterclass in creating hype for a single moment and delivering perfectly. It's such a subtle, adaptive move, but it's so carefully and deliberately crafted. That last page of the intermission is essentially written as one super long 5 chord, this tensiony beast waiting to resolve to our tonic. Also notice how the synth always waits 1 bar before starting, and always ends the phrase at the end of the 4-bar line. This is very deliberate. The game doesn't know exactly when you're going to shoot up into the sky into Rainbow Road. They could have just had 2 separate tracks, one for the intermission and one for Rainbow Road, which would crossfade into each other when you reach that certain point. Instead, the game first checks to see if you're in the sky yet, and if so, allows the currently playing phrase to finish, using an internal tempo map to perfectly line up this transitional section, which leads directly into Rainbow Road. And it'll sound good every single time, because all of these phrases sound like nothing. We can go from any of them straight into the main event without disrupting a melody we were actively enjoying listening to. In fact, I'm certain most players won't even notice that there's two separate tracks joined together. It just sounds like one long, through-composed intro into our main theme, which serendipitously syncs in this cinematic sequence. Just a bit of extra behind-the-scenes video game wizardry that makes this moment feel so magical. After those few beats of breathtaking, glittery ambience, we're taken directly into our bombastic main theme. Let's take a listen to more of that theme. Just a banger Rainbow Road theme. Let's talk about melody. Right after the downbeat, we finally get that catharsis, assembling our fragmented melody from the intermission into this powerful, anthemic two-measure motif, which repeats with slight variation to strengthen its presence in our ears, because repetition legitimizes. It's a pretty interesting motif actually. Despite being 10 notes long, only uses 3 distinct notes, D, A, and E, or in this case, our tonic, 5th, and 2nd scale degrees respectively. It's so cool, I love how open it sounds, because our 3 notes are just 2 stacked open 5ths. Because of this, it doesn't have much weight in the tonality, allowing it to be easily reharmed and iterated on without losing its identity. But it's still such a strong melodic figure, both due to how often the motif is repeated throughout the variations, and because the contour and offbeat syncopated feel gives it such a distinct and recognizable character. It helps too that the melody is kind of similar to previous Rainbow Roads' main motifs, with that opening ascending 4th which eventually ends up on the 5th an octave higher. Music Theory actually did a wonderful video about exactly this. Pause the video and check it out if you haven't already seen it. But all of that is to say, already such a strong theme only 4 measures in. The chords are cool too, it's kind of similar to what happens in the intermission track and how it's hybridized and ascends. But honestly, this happens in like every Mario Kart World track. What is neat though is the harmonic structure of the intro. The bass climbs all the way up from our tonic D up the minor scale until we land on our flat 7, which we would otherwise feel as wanting to pull up one more step into D. But we actually slightly subvert that and fall into our hybridized 5 chord for a stronger and more satisfying resolution into our A section. This A section is just bread and butter, mostly just simple, feel-good diatonic chords. The bass jumps up in this first phrase before walking up to the 5, utilizing this inverted 1 chord to bridge our regular root position 1 and the 4 afterwards. The next phrase is very similar, but introduces some slight non-diatonicism with this lovely 2-5-4. This then leads us into some more secondary dominance. That 5 of 6 especially has so much pull and feels so nice and strangely unexpected. Afterwards we have this climbing figure starting on the 2 and walking up until we hit the 5. Keep this figure in mind as we'll see it a lot more later. As an aside, I received a comment on the previous video asking me to talk about orchestration techniques instead of things people actually care about, like hybrid chords. And you know what? You know what I have to say to people like you? Yeah, you're probably right. So let's talk orchestration. One thing I absolutely love about the Rainbow Road theme is how it handles the relationship between the melody and counter melody. From the beginning, the strings and synth alternate playing the main melody. often with one of the parts sustaining over chord tones while the other takes over. But sometimes, like at the end of the first page, the non-melody part develops into more of a counter-melody, delivering important chord tones that serve to further bolster our otherwise more diatonic melody. For now, the counter-melody mostly follows the contour of the main melody, but we'll take a look at some cooler development of that later. Let's take a listen to the B section. We have this subtle modulation to our parallel minor, D minor, or alternatively its relative major, F major. The strings take over the main melody with the classic 4-4 minor move, which moves to this 3 and then 5 of 2, which repeats. If you think of the 4 minor as an acceptable substitute for the 5, and the 5 of 2 as just the dominant version of our 6, we realize it's pretty much just the Royal Road chord progression. Wait a minute, Royal Road? Rainbow Road?
Damn, Daniel!
Okay, but anyways, this section continues before gradienting back into D major, with a 2-5 that takes us into this cool-ass synth solo. Let's take a listen. The solo plays over pretty much our standard A section, and there isn't really much I need to talk about except for maybe acknowledging this hilarious bebop lick. But with that, segment 1 is done. After the solo plays, it loops back to the B section, then back to the beginning. Overall, segment 1 of Rainbow Road is a great overture of sorts that firmly establishes our main motif and teases concepts we'll see further developed in the later variations, such as the interplay between the melody and counter-melody, the tonal shift to the darker parallel minor, and the general anthemic rock orchestral instrumentation. We move to segment 2 in a similar adaptive move. Shortly before we cross the checkpoint, the top instrumental layers fade out, leaving just the drums. After the end of the phrase, there's a short drum fill, which then leads into our shimmery water level section of the theme. Flying over the clouds into this new segment, we leave behind our bright and polychromatic course for this colder, glittery river. The music changes accordingly, the drums move to a more halftime feel, and the orchestration thins out to pretty much just that bell melody over harp arpeggios. But the melody and harmony otherwise are still recognizable. The main motif plays verbatim, but holds on that high note rather than playing the latter half of the phrase we heard in segment 1. The harmony is a very mild reharm, starting on the 4 and walking down to the 2 for a very standard 2-5-1. It's a cool development of our rising bass line we've seen in segment 1. We instead fall down the scale in steps, which actually kind of mirrors the physical layout of this part of the track, which has us gliding down from the clouds into the water. But we still use that rising bass line here to build excitement for the B section, which features a new melody in our familiar synth and this lovely tumbling chord progression that progressively gets darker. The D is powerfully bright and major, the B flat and G are modal interchange from D minor, and that final E flat is from the darker D Phrygian. The interplay between D major and D minor feels like a development of the B section of segment 1, which works super well in this colder part of the track. And it still further develops. We hear our main motif in the choir under our new chord progression, and we get another counter melody with the synth becoming more active over the sustained notes in the voice, and vice versa. We can see this exchange of melody even more blatantly in this phrase, where they kind of dovetail and tumble into each other, continuing our falling kind of theme. An absolutely wonderful second segment. I just love the color contrast and the halftime feel. Even the synthesized voice and sax lines just feel so watery and dark without losing that Rainbow Road feel. This B section loops indefinitely until you cross the next checkpoint, at which point everything except the sax layers fade out. After the phrase finishes, we go to this 4 on the floor kick drum, which loops until you land in segment 3, which we'll talk about in a second, but oh darn it, I got hit by a blue shell. I didn't really have any items to protect me, but luckily I did have Incogni to protect my data from being sold by online data brokers. I don't know about you guys, but I am constantly inundated with spam calls and scam emails to both my personal and work emails, so much so that I've pretty much turned off notifications on my phone. These predatory data brokers have my name, address, phone number, and even more sensitive information like my social security number, just floating around in hundreds of databases. Typically, these brokers sell your data to advertisers, but often it ends up in the hands of scammers and other bad actors, potentially leading to nasty things like identity theft. And chances are your info is floating around in these databases as well. But Incogni can help with this. They reach out to these data brokers on your behalf, scrubbing your personal info from these databases. You don't have to do a thing, as the entire process is automated, and you can even see the progress of these removal requests on your home page. I just signed up this morning, and so far my data has been removed from 52 different websites, saving me 39 hours that I can instead spend making video essays about timesigs. And it doesn't just end there. Even after your info is removed, Incogni works to prevent your data from reappearing on these websites. Check out my promo link for an exclusive 60% discount on your first year. Link is in the description. After you land on the space station, the segment 3 variation begins. Another huge contrast to actually both of our previous segments. Most notably, we now have this kind of EDM instrumentation, but also we've modulated to F major, up a minor third from D major. It's kind of a cool and subtle gradient. Segment 1 is pretty firmly in D major. Segment 2 is kind of somewhere between D major and D minor. And segment 3 is now in F major, which we know is just the relative major of D minor. Otherwise, the melody is very similar to segments 1 and 2 with our main motif, but now with this kind of Mixolydian, bluesy, rockabilly harmony we see in the game's main theme. And speaking of which, shortly after our familiar rising bassline section, we actually have a callback to the game's main theme, with this ripping guitar solo underneath. Nothing particularly new or interesting in the music theory, but narratively is so fun. Honestly, one of my favorite tropes. This track is the final boss of the game, so to speak. The last track in the unlockable special cup, and last thing you're going to do before seeing the credits. Hearing this title screen theme at the end of your journey just makes you feel everything you've done since starting. And though it's admittedly not a particularly long experience, still makes this moment feel so special. Like the other segments, this B section loops indefinitely until you near the last checkpoint, fading into an ambient track until you cross the checkpoint. The final lap musical stinger then plays before taking us into the fourth and final segment. God, I love this segment so much. The A section is almost identical to the A section from segment 1 except for 2 key differences. We stick to our key of F major established in the previous segment, which gives this finale a warmer feeling relative to our prior key, due to being flatter on the circle of fifths. And the orchestration is bigger. The melody starts in our string section, harmonized in the lower voices, before going to our horns and then the synth. One cool detail I like about this part is, after the rising bass section, we extend the phrase by an extra 2 bars, building even more tension with this loose Mario resolution. The B section is a callback to segment 2 with the halftime feel and same chord progression, but now featuring a true counter melody. Honestly, it sounds like such a strong motif that I feel like it's probably from another track or something, but I can't quite place it. If anyone knows, please let me know in the comments. The strings take over the melody for that rising part, but we get a cool substitution of the D flat rather than our expected B flat chord, just for a bit of subversive fun. And then finally we go to this epic C section. Just absolutely breathtaking. It's just so soaring. We have these 2 melodies that are playing over each other, and each one is so compelling that it's hard to say which one is intended to be the counter melody. Notably, I'm like 80% sure that the synth melody is intended to be a variation of the main theme of the game, especially with that recognizable motif at the end there. Anecdotally at least, this section especially feels so reminiscent of like a magical girl transformation sequence or something, with the polyphonic melodies, orchestration, and string writing. This upcoming chord progression is one of my low-key favorites, and speaking of anime, I can only recall it being used in one other place. But first, let's take a listen to what we have here. We repeat the synth melody in the horns, this time over string staccatos. And we have this rising bass line, which notably starts on our inverted 1 chord, rising up in half steps until we land on our 6. It's just so unbelievably powerful, and one of the coolest cases in my opinion of using a simple inversion of a diatonic chord to achieve something so elegant. I've previously only heard this chord progression used in the Naruto Shippuden opening Silhouette. It's slightly different, omitting our diminished chord to maintain that 1 chord per measure harmonic rhythm, but still does that rising figure starting from our 1 in first inversion. And in both examples, it just sounds so yearning. I just love how much tension we create with our diminished chord and powerful 5 of 6. And then shortly after this, we flip the direction with the bass now falling downwards in what I like to affectionately call the Alan Menken line cliché. This falling section just feels so much like a conclusion. We're no longer building all this tension with our rising lines. Instead, the chord progression comes tumbling down as we soar through the air towards the finish line at the end of Rainbow Road. Since there's no segment after this, the music loops, using the D flat and E flat as a Mario resolution back to the F major at the start of the segment. But for our purposes, that's all there is to it. Just a magical track, and such a strong and varied Rainbow Road that I genuinely don't know how they're gonna top this when they make Mario Kart 10 in 25 years or so. I probably have like one more Mario Kart World video in me before I get bored. But I'll wait until they add some new tracks or something, so thanks for your patience until then. Honestly, I probably could put out another Mario Kart video by like next week, but I keep getting distracted inserting Deltarune melodies into Mario Kart tracks.